I was lying on the examination couch, and the doctor was running the ultrasound sensor over my stomach. If only everything would work out. But suddenly, the doctor stopped and looked at me in horror. My heart was pounding, and then the doctor breathed out. "Your child is a demon." My heart sank, my vision blurred. No, not that. I didn't even think about getting pregnant before. In high school, I had the love of my life. Hero. I thought nothing could separate us, but then I found out that he cheated on me. It was a big blow. And I couldn't trust the guys anymore. Because of that incident, I turned into a wild child. I hung out endlessly and changed guys like socks. But one day, my life changed dramatically. I met Fred and I really fell in love. Of course, at first, I denied it and thought we were going to have an affair for a couple of weeks. But Fred wasn't like the other guys. He took care of me, always helped me, and never once let me doubt his loyalty. He wasn't interested in anyone but me. I tried to distance myself, but Fred kept asking me out, making me feel better with little things. And I didn't even know I was falling madly in love. So, instead of a couple of weeks, we met for 6 months, and I could not imagine life without Fred. Only with him did I truly feel happy. After my dates with Fred, I traditionally met with my friend Lara. We went to college together and she knew everything about me. So, the day after Fred and I celebrated our 6-month anniversary, I went to the cafe to meet Lara. I told her in detail that Fred had given me a surprise. He had arranged a picnic on the embankment. He ordered my favorite Italian food, the best wine. And then, when we were talking, he danced with me to the singing of street musicians. It was so romantic. But for most of the story, Lara was interrupting me. She always did so. She wondered what kind of movies Fred liked, what kind of wine he drank. I stopped paying attention to it a long time ago. But when I finished speaking, Lara suddenly declared that Fred was not a match for me at all. I almost choked on what I heard and stared at her in shock. What do you mean? Lara told me that Fred was a womanizer, and I was just a toy for him. He didn't love me. My jaw almost dropped. What made her think that? Fred was not a cheater, but Lara persisted, saying at the first opportunity Fred would run away to another woman. I couldn't take it anymore and shouted at Lara to shut up. Fred and I had been together for a long time and we loved each other, to which Lara said that we would break up anyway and left. I was completely lost. What happened to my friend? We had never had a fight before. And why would Lara think Fred was a womanizer? I went to college the next day, hoping to make up with Lara, but she was nowhere to be found. Strange. Maybe she was sick. I went to my locker, thinking, and froze. It was as if someone had poked the lock open. I quickly opened the locker and all things were in place. But then my eyes fell on the white envelope. I didn't remember ever having one. There was a note in it and a pregnancy test. Unused. I didn't understand anything and quickly read the note. Someone was congratulating me on my pregnancy. What an idiotic joke. I slammed my locker shut and decided to order a pizza in the dining room. My favorite food always calmed me down, but as soon as I ate a piece, I almost threw up. What the hell? I loved Italian food. Then I remembered the note from the locker and the test. I shivered. What if it was not a joke? I looked down at my stomach. It seemed that something moved inside. Oh no. Dropping the pizza, I dashed back to the locker and pulled out the test. My heart was pounding as I ran to the bathroom. I needed to find out now. While I waited for the result, I mentally prayed, don't let it be 2 bars. I squeezed my eyes shut and examined, looking at the test, and at the same moment, my heart sank. This was not a joke. I was pregnant. What should I do now? How would Fred react? Terrible thoughts came to my mind at once. What if Lara was right and he left me right away? I walked out of the bathroom with the test in my hand, my shoulders sagging, and suddenly I ran into Lara. She gave me a quick look and said sarcastically that I put on some weight. Had your stomach grown? A chill ran down my spine. I hid the test behind my back and ran to the exit. Someone found out I was pregnant before I did. I couldn't believe it. But I was even more worried about Fred. Lara's words were still ringing in my head. He'll leave you at the first opportunity. Tears welled up in my eyes. No, I needed to confirm everything. The tests can be wrong. I immediately Googled the nearest clinic and rushed there. The doctor saw me right away, and so I lay on the couch, and the doctor declared that my future child was a demon. I couldn't believe it. And I was crying openly. How was that even possible? It was like a nightmare. As if hearing my thoughts, the doctor showed me the ultrasound. It became harder to breathe. Instead of a child, there was a little devil with horns and a tail. My vision immediately went dark. I almost fainted. And the doctor immediately put ammonia to my nose. The sharp smell brought me back to my senses, but it didn't make me feel any better. My child was a demon. And the doctor only carefully added that now emotional stress was not recommended. I could hurt the baby. I didn't want a baby, especially a monster. My eyes immediately filled with tears. I quietly asked if I could have an abortion, but the doctor shook his head, only with the permission of the child's father. I was terribly depressed, and I was terribly afraid to tell Fred about the pregnancy. After all, I was sure he would leave me, but was there any other way? I sobbed. No. Fred had to find out. With trembling hands, I dialed him and asked him to meet me in the park across the clinic. The wait was terrible. I imagined how Fred would react to the news of the pregnancy, and I almost cried. On top of that, I was shaking all over. Fred would leave me. Lara was right. When Fred arrived, he looked terribly excited and immediately gave me a protective hug, asking me what was wrong and why I was so pale. I looked into his eyes and could not utter it. My heart was pounding, and I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. Come with me. Gathering my thoughts, I blurted out, I'm pregnant, and then I looked down. I felt like the silence lasted forever. But Fred suddenly lifted my face by the chin and gently said that this was great news. He was smiling. Oh, Fred, that's not all. Our baby is a monster. Fred immediately froze and asked, is this a joke? No, Fred, this isn't a joke. The doctor showed me the image. Our child is a real demon. I did not notice how I burst into tears, but Fred suddenly shook my hand firmly and snapped, we're going back to the hospital. I asked why. But Fred didn't seem to notice me. Did he still want to have an abortion? I sobbed again. When we got to the reception desk, Fred asked us to see another doctor for some reason, but the receptionist said they didn't do that. But Fred was insistent. Apparently, he did not want this child so much that he demanded the director of the clinic. And so I was lying on the couch, and the doctor was again running the ultrasound sensor over my stomach. Without saying a word, Fred stared intently at the monitor, and then the doctor said that I would have no monster. I immediately jumped. Is my child normal? But the doctor just shook his head. There was no baby at all. I was not pregnant. I stared in shock, but half an hour ago, another doctor confirmed my pregnancy. Fred suddenly dropped his head, clearly upset. So he wanted me to be pregnant? Fred, you didn't want me to have an abortion, did you? Fred looked at me in horror. Of course no. I just wanted to make sure. I wanted to see our baby. There was no baby. What was going on here anyway? I felt dizzy. Okay, that's enough. I needed to get some air. I jumped up and went into the corridor, but stopped at the turn. Lara was standing around the corner. I immediately crouched, carefully peeking out. What was she doing here? And suddenly Lara turned around. At the last second, I flattened myself against the wall. If only she didn't notice. I stood there for a while not breathing. Finally, I heard Lara's soft voice. That was close. But who was she talking to? I peeked around the corner and saw that Lara was holding something out to the doctor. I looked closer. Oh my god. It was the doctor who told me about the monster baby. Lara handed the doctor an envelope, thanking him for his help. She's not worthy of a guy like Fred. He should be mine. I was in shock. How could Lara do this to me? Because of her, I got through this living nightmare. I thought that I would lose everything, and this was because of jealousy? I was literally exploding inside, and I couldn't take it anymore. I came around the corner and shouted to Lara that I'd heard everything. I expected remorse, but Lara suddenly grinned maliciously and said that in any case, Fred was hers now. He left me anyway after the news about the monster baby. I was about to answer her when Fred came up behind me and gently put his arm around my waist. He didn't even look at Lara. He just said, "I will never leave you. You are my family." He was not at all afraid of my pregnancy. But on the contrary, Fred suggested that we thought about a baby as beautiful as me. I was moved by his words. We smiled at each other and looked at Lara, who was red with anger. She ran out into the street in a rage, and Fred bent down and kissed me. And at that moment, all the bad things seemed to disappear. One kiss from Fred made me feel like the happiest person in the world. This story only confirmed that he was my true love. A year has passed since that incident, and now Fred and I have a baby, and he is the most beautiful baby in the world. Not all like a monster, although sometimes he does not let us sleep at night. I don't hold a grudge against Lara, because if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't have Billy. But since then, I choose my friends much more carefully. After all, a true friend will never plot against you. Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you. My hands were tightly bound, and I was shaking with fear. I needed to get out of this basement before I get killed. I tried to loosen the rope, but it only bit harder into my hands. And then my brother Andy grabbed me. I swallowed. It seemed to be the end, and it all started so well. Our Smith family was one of the wealthiest and most famous in the city. My parents were always busy with business, and I, the only daughter, was simply ignored. It was as if I didn't exist for them. Because of this, I had a lot of complexes and problems, and especially with self-esteem. I was very unsure of myself. I had no real friends, and everyone only talked to me because of my famous parents. I didn't pay attention to this until my parents once held a charity event at the school. Another reason to discuss their importance. I was expecting an invitation, but they never gave it to me. They just forgot about me. The mousy girl. This time it struck a chord with me. I cried all night, and I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to live like this anymore. I decided to change everything. I needed to have self-confidence. Before going to bed, I set myself a goal. Tomorrow, I would become bold. For example, I would charm some handsome guy, and no one would dare to think of me as a mousy girl anymore. In the morning, I put on makeup, put on a short skirt, and went to school. I was so worried that I didn't notice how a strange guy was confidently walking towards me near the entrance to the school. We bumped into each other, and I immediately apologized in embarrassment. Heck, he was a good-looking guy. And then I came to my senses. I was bold, pulling on a smile. I said as confidently as I could, "Hi, beauty." "You were in such a hurry to ask me out?" The guy looked me over. Everyone was waiting for him to answer me. He was going to blow me off for sure, and in front of everyone, I suddenly wanted to disappear. But instead, he grinned. I didn't think I had such a cheeky sister. My jaw dropped. "What sister?" The guy immediately grabbed my arm and dragged me inside the school. "Come with me quickly and I'll explain everything." A minute later, we were in the men's room. The guy had barely opened his mouth when the principal burst into the booth. He started shouting that we were crazy to hide in the toilets. My ears burned, and I immediately ran out, followed by my alleged brother. Why did this handsome guy call me his sister? What was going on? I turned around to demand an explanation, but the guy just said, "Wait for me at the exit tonight after school." He disappeared around the corner of the corridor. I was thinking about him all day. He was so beautiful. Okay, stop. Was I in love? He was kind of like my brother. Damn, I could not wait to meet him. Barely waiting for the evening, I ran out of school, but the guy wasn't there. It looked like he wouldn't come, and I was a naive fool. He was so handsome, even if he was weird. I waited a little longer and trudged home sad. My thoughts were racing. I couldn't concentrate, and I was almost hit by a car that swerved around the corner and braked next to me. The front window slowly lowered, and I saw the same guy behind the wheel smiling. He told me to jump in. I hesitated. I never got in a car with strangers. I got scared, but then I remembered that I had promised myself to be bold. So, exhaling, I resolutely sat down in the front seat next to him. We went somewhere. The guy immediately said that his words might shock me. I froze. Maybe he also fell in love with me at first sight. But he exhaled and said, "My name is Andy Smith, and I'm your brother." I looked at the guy in shock, not believing his words. What's that nonsense? Then Andy sighed and handed me some documents. I took them hesitantly. It was said in the discharge from the hospital that my mother had twins, a boy and a girl, but the parents disowned the boy, Andy, because he was found to have health problems. The guy added with grief that they just didn't want to bother with him and spend money and time on his treatment. I thought about it. It was hard to believe, but my parents had always been selfish, interested only in money and popularity. That sounded like the truth. I felt so sorry for him. He even cried a little when he told me. Suddenly I got overwhelmed by hatred and I said through my teeth, "They need to be taught a lesson." Andy immediately added, "In the most painful way for them." I asked to repeat with interest, and he continued, "Let's deprive the folks of their money. They can't live without it." What? But what if we got spotted? Andy just grinned and said that such a confident girl could do anything. His support gave me a second wind. And when he added that with the stolen money, we would buy everything we wanted, for example, cool clothes, I immediately agreed. We agreed to meet at the cafe tomorrow, after I stole a few $1,000s from my parents. Andy gave me a lift home, and we said a warm goodbye. I was still a little hurt that he was my brother, because I really liked Andy. I sat in my room all evening, worried, doubtful, and waiting for my parents to go to bed. No one even came to say goodnight to me. I felt a surge of hatred again, and as soon as their voices faded, I went on the prowl. I tiptoed to my parents' bedroom and turned the door handle without breathing. It opened with a soft creak. I panicked. What if they woke up? But my parents were snuffling. I crept past their bed and went to the dresser. My mom's bag was still there. Got it. My hands were shaking with excitement. I slowly opened the lock and began to search the wallet. Where was it? At that moment, Dad shouted, "Stop!" My heart sank. He was awake, on stiff legs. I turned around, but Dad was asleep. God, was he talking in his sleep? I had to hurry. In a hurry, I turned on the flashlight on my phone and shone it into the bag. The wallet, tucking it under my arm, I ran out of the room on tiptoe. Let Mom think she lost it somewhere. I couldn't sleep all night, and I went to school very tired. When I got to the cafe, Andy was not there. I began to worry. Where was he? I sat there for an hour, angry. It looked like this time he really wouldn't come. I was heading for the door when Andy burst into the cafe, apologizing for being late, and then he offered to make amends by going to the movies. First, we would watch the movie, and then we would go shopping and spend all the money on new clothes. My eyes lit up. Of course, I agreed. Andy said that he had already chosen a movie for us, Kidnapping. In the movie, he casually put his arm around my shoulder, and my stomach dropped from his touch. But then I thought he probably did it just in a brotherly way. And I was dreaming. He was my brother. After the movie, we were having fun discussing the ending when suddenly Andy said, "You're so brave and cool, just like the heroine of the movie." My cheeks burned at the statement. I needed to show him that I really was such a girl. But how? And then I came up with a scene from the movie where the main character was kidnapped and they demanded a ransom for her. But she behaved confidently and rebutted the kidnappers. What if... "Let's fake my kidnapping," I exclaimed. The idea seemed brilliant. And Andy winked at me and happily agreed, saying that he had the coolest and most brilliant sister in the world. His words warmed my chest. I smiled. Kidnapping is a serious matter. I will write a plan later, I said confidently and seriously. We spent the rest of the time shopping, and I didn't get home until the evening. On the way home, I began to doubt again. The folks, of course, annoyed me, but wasn't it too much to arrange a kidnapping? In my confusion, I reached the house, and suddenly I heard music from the windows. What was happening? I wanted to go inside, but the new big security guards said threateningly that he only let people in on the list. In my confusion, I gave my name, but it was not among the invited guests. This was my home. The guard didn't believe it. Heck. Annoyed, I dialed my dad. He picked up the phone only the third time and asked briefly why I was calling. because I couldn't get into my own house. Soon, my parents let me in. I was beside myself with anger, and I shouted that they never gave a damn about me. But now everything would change. My brother, who you abandoned, helped me become confident. The parents pretended to be surprised, looked at each other, and said that they did not understand what I was talking about. Of course, liars. I ran to my room in tears. I had enough. Only Andy understood me. I made up my mind and wrote to him to meet me at the house as soon as possible. I quickly gathered my things and climbed out the window into the street. Andy had already arrived. He said that he had found an abandoned house that would be perfect for our performance. I silently agreed. It was a good thing Andy was so smart. Without him, I'd fall apart. When we stopped at the gas station, I was waiting for Andy in the car and suddenly noticed that my lipstick was smeared. There was no napkins, so I decided to look into the glove compartment. As I opened it, Andy's driver's license fell out. He was so funny in the photo. I looked closely and suddenly froze in horror. His last name wasn't Smith at all, but Hanks. And he was born 2 years later than me, so he couldn't possibly be my brother. So that hospital report was a fake. My throat was dry. With trembling hands, I picked up my phone and texted my mom that I had been kidnapped and sent the geolocation. At that moment, Andy returned. He asked me in surprise if I was okay, because I looked worried. I forced a smile. Everything's fine. We arrived at the house late at night. Andy asked me again if I was okay. I realized that I needed to somehow deflect suspicion from myself and immediately decided to play along with him. Well, Andy, I forgot to tell you my plan. Let's go down to the basement. You tie me up and then call my parents via video link, and I'll pose as a victim and say that I'm being held for ransom. We will tell them where to put the money, and then I will pretend that I escaped and ran away, and we will divide the money again. Andy immediately cheered up and agreed, found ropes in the house, and began to tie me up. And then he took my phone. Hell, I hadn't thought of that. My vision blurred. I didn't delete the message about the kidnapping in my texting with my mom. I was hoping he wouldn't notice it and would turn on the camera right away. But Andy froze, and suddenly he growled angrily. Do you think you can get away with this? He walked slowly toward me. I cringed with fear. You're finished, little sister. Andy immediately grabbed me and dragged me into the street. I tried to resist, but I was bound. Andy shoved me into the trunk and slammed the door, and everything went dark. This was the end. He started the engine, but then I heard the sirens. Hey, I'm here. I started banging my fists on the side of the car and shouting. The trunk opened and a stern cop helped me out. Andy was arrested, and I breathed a sigh of relief. This horror was over. And suddenly my parents threw their arms around me. My mom said in a trembling voice that she was very worried about me after my text. They immediately called the police. My dad sadly admitted that it was all their fault because they never paid attention to me. But now, everything would change. They were very proud of me. A kind and brave girl, and they asked me to forgive them. I was so happy to hear them say that. A week later, Andy was put on trial. He turned out to be a serial fraudster who could not be caught for many years. I was rewarded in front of everyone for helping to catch a criminal. I was so proud of myself because I realized that in order to become confident, you do not need to prove anything to anyone. It is enough to believe in yourself and your strength. On my way out of the courtroom, I walked past Andy, gave him a cheeky wink, and said, well, Beauty, when you be out in 10 years, we'll go to the movies again. But I choose the movie. Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you.